All right, this is a review for the EOC, Spanish for High School. The focus is going to be cell basics. So that's where we're going to start. So you have your set of guided notes your teacher provided you. What you want to do is fill those out and use those as a study guide for the quiz, the in-class quiz you can have tomorrow. So you study the notes and be able to fill in the charts, and you should do really well. All right, first and foremost, when you study biology, you have to know what cell theory is. What cell theory is there's three components that we say make up cell theory. First one is anything that is alive. Anything that is alive, any organism, is composed of at least one cell or many cells. So that's the first part of cell theory. Second part of cell theory is the cell is a basic unit of life for all living things. So if something's alive, it is made or composed of cells. The last part is all cells are produced by the division of pre-existing cells. So all cells come from other cells. Next thing you need to be aware of is the two different major cell types. You have prokaryotic cells, which are considered the first cells. They have no nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. Modern bacteria is a great example of prokaryotes. They are the simplest type of cell. They have a singular circular chromosome that is not contained in a nucleus. If you see, here's another picture of a prokaryote. Has a nucleoid region that represents basically the DNA of the genetic materials all spread out. It is not condensed into a nucleus. It does have a cell membrane and a cell wall. It does contain ribosomes, because remember, ribosomes make proteins, so even bacteria has to be able to make proteins in order for them to function properly. Eukaryotes are complex cells. We say multicellular organisms are eukaryotic cells. They have a nucleus, so if you look right there on the little chart, let me circle that a little bit better. If we look right here on the little chart right there, you see the nucleus right there. And it also has membrane-bound organelles. That would be the mitochondria and chloroplast in plant cells. Protists, fungi, plants, and animals are all eukaryotic. They are more complex. They're more specialized cells because of the organelles that they have. Key organelles that they have that you have to be able to write down on your sheet. One is a vacuole. Vacuole, the purpose of a vacuole is for storage. Plants have a very large vacuole. If you notice here, this area right here is a central vacuole where plants typically will store water. There are no vacuoles in bacteria cells, but there are small, tiny vacuoles in animal cells. So when we talk about differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, you should have a little grid on your notes. This is one area where you want to fill this out, so let's talk. Prokaryotic cells, three things you need to know for the EOC. They're very small. They do not have a nucleus, but they contain DNA spread all the way through the cytoplasm, and they have no membrane-bound organelles. Okay, so that's prokaryote. Bacteria is a great example of that. So if you have a question that discusses bacteria, that's really what they're focusing on. Eukaryotic cells tend to be fairly large. They have a nucleus, which is surrounded by a membrane. So the DNA is sectioned off from the rest of the cell, and they have membrane-bound organelles. One of the key organelles of the cells is the nucleus. The nucleus controls the normal activities of the cells. That's done by the DNA, which you learned in a different chapter. It's the control center of the cell. It dictates what the cell does. It has a nuclear membrane or a membrane that surrounds it that has pores in it but separates off the DNA from the rest of the cell. It is typically the largest organelle in a cell. Another important organelle is the mitochondria. Mitochondria basically is considered the powerhouse of the cell because it produces the ATP. Remember, the only type of energy that cells can use is ATP. So when we intake food, eventually through cellular respiration, we produce ATP, and cellular respiration actually occurs inside the mitochondria. That's where it happens to produce ATP. So the more active your cells are, like muscle cells, the more mitochondria you're going to have because you're going to need more energy. Plants and animal cells have to generate energy, obviously, so they're going to have mitochondria. It's going to be in both cells. And again, I mentioned it already, it's the site of cellular respiration. The next organelle that's important is the ribosomes. The ribosomes are where proteins are made, and RNA takes the code and creates proteins. So these are basically protein factories for the cell. Remember, proteins are made of amino acids. Here's a protein right here. If you notice, all the little pieces are different amino acids that are strung together. Proteins are the building blocks of cells, so they're really important. And that process that happens in the ribosomes is called protein synthesis. So really what you need to know about ribosomes is that's where proteins are made or manufactured. The next thing is the Golgi bodies. Golgi bodies look like a flattened stack of pancakes, kind of. They take proteins that are made in the rough ER, and they help transport them, making little vesicles. You see a little vesicle right there. They basically package them up like UPS, kind of, and ships the protein wherever it needs to go in the cell. The next organelle is the endoplasmic reticulum, or the ER. It is a hollow membrane with tubes. It does connect to the nuclear envelope and the cell membrane, and it helps in the synthesis of proteins because the ribosomes are actually located on the rough ER. You see them right there in the picture. Also helps transport proteins. So you have two kinds of endoplasmic reticulum. You have the smooth and the rough. The rough is where the ribosomes are, where proteins are synthesized. Chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are big for plants because plants make their own food. This is where photosynthesis occurs. Remember, photosynthesis is taking energy from sunlight, producing food in the form of glucose. So you're taking light energy and changing it into chemical energy. Remember, the chloroplasts also contain chlorophyll. That's why plant cells appear green when you look at them. Next one, cell wall. Cell wall is only contained in plants. It's a non-living layer. It's found in plants. It provides structure and helps protect the cell. It's basically found outside of the cell membrane, so that means both plant and animal cells have cell membranes, but what you see here as I'm coloring it around there, plants have a cell wall because they don't really have an internal skeleton, so that's where they get their structure from. Next one, plasma membrane or cell membrane. That's going to be the inside layer. It's actually the outside layer of animal cells. It is a double layer of phospholipids and proteins, surrounds the outside of all cells, and the key part that it plays, or the key function, is it controls what enters and leaves the cell. So it allows certain molecules in, allows certain molecules out. It's like the gatekeeper. Key differences you need to know. There's a little chart or a little question on your notes about differences between plants and animal cells. This is something you're going to be quizzed on. There's basically three key differences. If you look, plant cells have a cell wall, plant cells have a large vacuole, and plant cells have chloroplasts. Those are the three key differences between plant cells and animal cells. They could easily ask you on the EOC. So you know that plant cells have a cell wall. You can see it right there in the diagram. They have a large vacuole represented by that, and they have chloroplasts, the little green things you see in the cell. If you take a look at an animal cell doesn't have any of those three things. So that's the key differences if you're comparing and contrasting. Next thing, cell membrane we call it the fluid mosaic model because it's semi-permeable. That means only certain things can go in and out. What it wants to go in and wants to go out, that's really what it's talking about. Last part of this review with cells has to do with transportation. If you notice on the bottom of your guided notes, there's a little grid to fill out. This is the grid that you need to copy. It's the key differences, compare and contrast between active and passive transport. Active, you see the word active means energy, really. It needs energy, and when we talk about cells and energy, we're talking about ATP. So when we say active transport, we're saying ATP. So it requires energy. It actively moves molecules across the cell membrane, and it goes from low concentration to high concentration. Because in nature, normally you have diffusion, which means molecules have a tendency to go from high concentration to low concentration. That's what naturally happens. Active transport is the opposite. If you notice here, it says goes from low concentration to high concentration. That's against the concentration gradient. Then you see the word passive. If you look right there, there's a great example of being passive, sitting in a chair. Passive means no energy is required, so you're not going to have ATP used. Molecules are moving randomly, and it goes normally, like in nature, from the high concentration to the low concentration. So you definitely have to know the difference between active and passive transport. If you look, there's different types of cellular transport. Whenever we say passive, it's kind of like you being a rollerblade on the top of a hill. To get down, to go from high to low requires very little energy or no energy at all. So that's an example when we say passive transport. The cell doesn't use energy. Three types: diffusion, facilitated diffusion. That's where you have little channels in the membrane where water goes from one to the other, or actually water's osmosis, but other molecules can travel through the cell membrane. Active transport's like if you're on rollerblades and you're at the bottom of a hill and you got to get up to the top of the hill. That's going to require energy to do that, right? So a cell is using energy. Protein pump is an example of that. Endocytosis and exocytosis are also examples of cells using energy to transport something across the membrane. Here you go again, basically diffusion is always going from higher to lower. Again, it's passive. Facilitated diffusion means it's going through a protein channel, so you see like the molecule traveling through there like a little tunnel. And osmosis is the movement of water that goes through the membrane. And osmosis is only specifically dealing with water. And then active transport, again, using ATP. So you have protein pumps that use ATP. Endocytosis is moving big molecules. Exocytosis is moving big molecules out. So you see a molecule coming out of a cell. Endocytosis is moving large molecules in. So you see particles that the cell wants, opens up its membrane, forms a big ball, and basically absorbs it. So endo means stuff is entering the cell. Exo means stuff is exiting the cell. Key thing you have to remember is it requires energy. If it's active transport, it requires energy. That is the end of the review for cell basics. This will help you on the EOC. Make sure you have your sheet filled out. Use it as a study guide, because when you come into class, the first 5 minutes of class, your biology teacher is going to be giving you a pop quiz on the material contained on the study guide. Save the study guide in your binder because you can use it for the EOC. Good luck.